Hi, welcome to Moonraker's Tales, Wiltshire Stories, where we discuss interesting things about Wiltshire. I'm Bethany.
And I'm Amy, and we're this episode's hosts.
Today we're going to be talking about murder cases in Wiltshire. Quick disclaimer, even though these may be older cases, they are still real people and real cases, so we'll still be trying to discuss these with respect. Our case for this episode is about the murder of Francis Saville Kent, a 4-year-old boy from Road Hill House in Wiltshire. Just a little background on this family. It's huge. Like, it's absolutely massive. Samuel Kent, the father, was married twice, and out of the 2 marriages he had 13 children. Unfortunately, 4 of them died when they were really young, so at the time of the murder there were only 9 with them, with only 8 of them living in the house. From his first marriage, in order of age, he had Mary Ann, Elizabeth, Edward, Henry, Constance and William.
10 years later, with his second wife, he welcomed Mary, Amelia, Francis and Evelyn to the home. The giant family were living in a 9-bedroom house, and with so many children, Samuel and his wife Mary Pratt decided to hire 2 nursemaids, Elizabeth Goff and Sarah Cox, and a cook named Sarah Kerslake, who all lived in the house. They also had workers that didn't live in the house: John Holcomb, John Alloway, Daniel Oliver, Emily Dowell, Mary Holcomb, and Anna Silcox. So all in all, there are a lot of people around and in the house.
Imagine it's the 29th of June, 1860, at midnight. All is well and calm in the Kent household. The children's candles have all been blown out, the windows have all been closed, the family dog has been taken off its chain. Elizabeth Goff noticed that Francis wasn't in his bed, but seeing that his bed was made, she assumed that he was with his mother. She said nothing and went to bed. Morning comes and Elizabeth goes to fetch Francis from his mother, but he's nowhere to be found.
This is when all hell breaks loose. Everyone is looking for this missing kid. The search party is sent out, and Samuel personally drives all the way up to Trowbridge to tell the superintendent, because he didn't think that the local police would tell him on time. Apparently, when he spoke to the superintendent, he had more information on the murder than he would admit to the detective later. Back at the house, the grounds were being searched, and 2 local men, Nat and Binger, who were helping the search party, noticed some blood outside the staff toilets in the garden.
As we all would be, the 2 men were terrified. Even then, that would be an understatement. Their blood ran cold as they opened the door to find Francis Saville Kent lying dead on the floor. The young boy was wrapped in a blood-soaked blanket pulled from his cot, still dressed in his nightshirt. His body was covered head to toe with wounds, with injuries including a sizable cut on his throat, a bruised mouth and a stab wound to his chest.
By this time, Nat had returned from the house, and the pair decided to place the blanket on the floor and wrap Saville up before carrying his body back to the family home. Witnesses of the case were originally the servants of the house, police and medical examiners, until the jury insisted that the coroner were to question the family too. Even then, he only questioned Constance and William. Mrs. and Mr. Kent were never formally investigated. Upon the public discovering Saville's death, many began to point fingers at Elizabeth Goff, the family caretaker, questioning how Elizabeth had not once awakened to someone taking the young boy. Upon seeing the blanket, Elizabeth exclaimed that she had only just realised that his blanket had also been taken. However, Mary and Pratt argued that Elizabeth had let her know that the blanket had been missing the moments after they realised Saville was missing.
When Mr. Kent returned home, he gave the laundry room key to the family's physician, Joshua Parsons. Parsons moved Saville's body into the room as he began to examine. Concluding the rigidness of Saville's body indicated that he had been dead for at least 5 hours before its discovery. The cut to the neck was also described as being to the bone and caused by a sharp instrument. Gnarly stuff, but he had also received a stab wound to the chest, but this had produced very little blood. Finally, the blackness to Saville's mouth was determined as being extreme pressure to the area.
Superintendent John Foley arrived at the home at 9:30 a.m. and began another investigation. The first conclusion he made was that the bedclothes lying on Saville's bed appeared to be folded by a practiced hand, clearly suggesting that one of the help had possibly murdered Saville. After this, Foley then checked the area where Saville had been found and discovered a breast flannel, a piece of cloth placed between the chest and the corset. The flannel was heavily soaked in blood. By the end of the day, another post-mortem had been conducted on Saville's body, and it had been confirmed that the darkening to the mouth was due to the blanket being thrust into the young boy's mouth to stop crying. However, everyone in the case was still baffled by the lack of blood present.
Called out later to help with the once missing child's case, now murder, was Jonathan Wiltshire, an original member of the detective branch. He was great at his job, best of the best, and almost everyone knew. Jonathan steadily began his investigation. His focus concentrated on the missing nightdress which belonged to Constance and the opportunity it created to blame the shortage of night clothes on the local laundress. He reported this along with his initial suspicions on the family. Not soon later, the 16th of July, magistrates directed Constance's arrest. giving Jonathan time to prepare a solidified case against her. Mr. Kent provided her with a barrister, someone who would advocate for her in court. She was later released on bail, with the case soon being dropped.
Obviously, sympathy was formed in favour of Constance in the paper. I mean, who is to assume that a 16-year-old was capable of such a crime? Yet, on the 18th of July 1865, Constance was transferred to the county jail at Salisbury. She pleaded guilty to the murder of her half-brother Saville. It was following that Constance revealed that she had written a letter to Sir John Eardley Wilmot, the baronet who helped clear her name. It read,
"The murder I committed to avenge my mother, whose place had been usurped by my stepmother. The latter had been living in my family home since my birth. She treated me with all the kindness of my own mother, and I loved her as though she had been. When no more than 3 years old, I began to observe that my mother held quite a secondary place as both a wife and as mistress of the house. It was who really ruled. Many conversations on the subject, which I was considered too young to understand. I heard and remembered it after many years. Mama died. From that time my love turned to the most bitter hatred. At such times my hate grew so intense that I could not remain in the room. I felt hatred towards everyone, and a wish to make them as wretched as myself. At last a change came. My conscience tormented me with remorse. Miserable, wretched, suspicious. I felt as though hell were in me. Then I resolved to confess."
It was later uncovered that Constance had taken her father's razor from his green case and used this to inflict the injuries to Saville. Upon murdering her half-brother, Constance returned to her room and washed the 2 small bloodstains on her clothes. In the days following, she realised that the blood was still visible, but only when she held it up to the light. Constance then decided to move the dress numerous times before burning it in her own bedroom. This is why the dress can never be found.
At the time, there was much speculation that Constance's confession was indeed false. Many assumed that the father, a known adulterer, was having an affair with the family's child carer, Elizabeth Gough, and murdered the child in a fit of rage after being interrupted. This theory fit a pattern with Mr. Kent, who was well versed in flirting with the many nannies working in the Kent household. Many were suspicious of Mr. Kent from the start, including the novelist Charles Dickens.
Constance was later sentenced to death, but this was commuted to a life in prison due to her young age. She served 20 years in a number of jails, including Millbank Prison in Westminster, London, and was later released in 1885 at the age of 41. During her lengthy time in prison, it is thought that Constance may have produced mosaics for a number of churches, including work for the crypt of St. Paul's Cathedral. Nolene Carl, in her book A Greater Guilt, touches on the work Constance was engaged in whilst incarcerated, including cooking, cleaning and laundry work.
And with that, we've reached the end of the episode. Thanks so much for listening. If you'd like to hear more stories about Wiltshire's history, you can check out our other episodes and subscribe to the podcast to be notified when we publish a new episode.
We'd also like to thank our editors for all their hard work. Thank you once again for listening, and we'll see you in the next episodes of Moonraker's Tale, Wiltshire's Story.